I would like to start with the perimeter of the study. Here is a picture of Horizon Europe. I'm going to tell you what I'm not going to talk about. The first is Pillar 1, which is excellent science. All of you know in particular about the ERC, which is a success story of European innovation. Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, former president of the ERC, is in the room, so he may answer questions about the ERC. Then there is Pillar 2. I'll talk a little bit about it. It's still pretty much a very bureaucratic endeavor with lots of constraints, in particular on collaboration, large-scale collaborations. It's still very political, with decision-making at the European Commission level, and many other things that we could discuss. You might think it's the elephant in the room, but what we're going to focus on is the red part, this very tiny part. Actually, it's even smaller than the red part, because if you look at what really looks like disruptive innovation, you have Pathfinder and a bit of transition. So it's a tiny early stage component with maybe 1/10 of the DARPA budget. So just to rehash the obvious, the EU is losing the global innovation race with implication for economic well-being, of course, but also we are losing on influence, regulatory and geopolitical. R&D spending is still too small. It's still at 2%, much less than what was decided in Lisbon 24 years ago. We are missing on R&D, and the discrepancy relative to the US, I will come back to that, is basically business R&D. And in terms of public support, it's roughly the same at 0.7 of GDP as in the US. Now, in terms of outcomes, they are not great. We are way beyond the US and even sometimes in China in terms of software, in terms of hardware, AI, and biotech. We still have pharmaceutical strengths, but they are at risk. And the next statistic, of course, is very depressing. You look at the top 20 tech companies in the world, 11 are American, 9 are Chinese. You look at the 20 top startups in the world, and none of them is European. It's a pretty depressing feature of Europe. Another interesting thing is the role of incumbents. The incumbents are extremely strong in Europe, much stronger than anywhere else. And also, we are very much positioned in the mid-tech range. So actually, if you look at 2003, it was dominated by the automobile industry, both in the US and in Europe. If you look at 20 years later, it's completely different with software, of course, dominating completely the US, and Europe still being with automotive. So we are in the mid-tech. So that means that there is lower value creation, lower profit margins, and for automobile, the risk of being leapfrogged, given that the new technologies are electric cars and autonomous vehicles. So there is a big danger of being leapfrogged. Now that we invest less in R&D can be understood in part by the fact that we are mid-tech. Of course, mid-tech doesn't consume as much R&D as high-tech. So that's what we call a mid-tech trap in the report. And the key question then is to ask oneself, do we have the institution it takes to meet the 21st century innovation challenge? So just a caveat here. The report focuses on the EU. A fair amount of the R&D in Europe is actually done at the member state level. That's different from the US. But we are going to focus on Horizon Europe. And Horizon Europe, just like in particular the EIC, has been announced to be the new DARPA, the European DARPA. And our view is that it's not a DARPA for several reasons. The first is that only a tiny fraction of Horizon Europe supports disruptive innovation. much of the funds actually are used to remedy capital market imperfection, if any, and therefore are devoted to scaling up SMEs. I mean, also startups, but mostly mature SMEs. So it's venture capital investment. It's not support to breakthrough innovation. And another view at that, angle at that, is that the financing is late in the process. So there is an index called the technology readiness level. From 1 to 10, when you get closer to 10, you get closer to the market. ARPA's finance TRLs 3, 4. And at 5, that goes to the market. Basically, the private sector takes over. Whereas, in Europe, lots of the financing is above 5. There is very little support to high-tech projects, and there may even be crowding out of business R&D in the mid-tech. So we need a very different governance to fulfill our ambition. Currently, the decision-making is very political. The European Commission, except for the ERC, has control over the allocation of the money. The board members are not required to be leading scientists, which may be fine especially if you are ITRLs, if you finance ITRLs projects, but that, for a new institution, you will not do that. In terms of program managers, there are very few of them, 9, which means that even if they are highly qualified, they cannot know everything, so we miss expertise. There are many more for DARPA, and DARPA is only defense. I mean, you also have the other ARPAs in the US. The program managers have very little authority to enter into and flexibly administer contracts and grant agreements. And finally, there are lots of bureaucratic rules, and one which bears on emphasizing is the insistence on collaboration. We all know that collaborations are good if they are bottom-up, if they are voluntary. But here there are requirements. So if you look at Pathfinder, if you look at Transition, and even more at Pillar 2, you get collaboration across many countries, across many firms. And whether it's going to be good for science, and also whether it's going to make a difference, is questionable. So very quickly, the implications are kind of obvious, given what I said. The first is that you have to reallocate funds to disruptive innovation, scale down all those little programs that I don't have time to talk about. If we want to finance equity stakes, we should do it through different channels. That's not support to disruptive innovation. And we should refocus on low TRL activities. We should reform the governance of the AIC, giving more power to the prominent scientists, having more program managers who are independent, qualified, and give them greater discretion. And we want to streamline management practices and so on and so forth. Now, this reform for sure will meet resistance, but it's doable if there is a political will. After all, in Europe, we have the ERC success story. So we could also have a success story down the road, the AIC as well. And that will enable the EU to escape the mid-tech trap by supporting game-changing innovation. Thank you very much, and apologies again for the start.
And thank you, Jean, for giving us this very concise rendering of a report which has almost 60 pages, whereas you have perhaps already heard that we have a part which is more descriptive on what the technology or mid-tech technology trap is and why we think it might be difficult for industry on its own to escape it, and then why government intervention, especially European intervention, might be required, but is, at least in our thinking, not yet forthcoming at the required scale and perhaps also quality and institutional structure. And since the purpose of the report is to influence policy making in Europe, very happy to with us somebody who is intimately involved in the area of innovation, namely Mr. Markus Schulte he is the head of cabinet of Commissioner Ivanova, who, among many other things, is also responsible for research and innovation. Markus, the floor is yours. Many thanks.